So here's a key statement this guy said in this. He goes, I think talking about exercise variation is key. At some point, you have to not do what's in the program and do what you can consistently do in terms of exercises. So yeah, just knowing when to make a change or if you're subscribing to somebody's program, these are generalized programs. So
another thing too, I think people think that they need exercise variability, where at the end of the day, like maybe that's your issue. Maybe there's a couple variations you're doing you shouldn't be.
Right.
Stick to what you know, right? But at the same time, I think what he's talking about is a selection from the workout programs.
Yeah, it's a lot of people buying programs. I mean, we've got programs too. And the challenge with putting together programs for the masses is it's somewhat generalized, right? It's not specific to anybody. And there is no one size that fits all. But we're going to try to do our very best to give people what they want, which is very important in selling a product. Like, I don't care who you are, that is part of it. Like, because if I try to sell them what they need all the time, I wouldn't sell shit. I learned that early. Yeah, I learned that early in this business. Like, there's a little bit of what they need and a lot more of what they want in the front end. And then if you're doing a really good job as a coach, you can build in or educate them on the things that they need more of along the way. Yep. So yeah, as people are purchasing programs, they're getting basically generalized format to create whatever the adaptation is that the program is designed to create, whether that's building strength or power or hypertrophy or all of the above over a period of time. You basically open up this program and the user has to be able to look at it and go, okay, I get what this is. Because if it's too obscure or if it requires equipment or space that the general user may or may not have, that's really challenging for that new person. And, as the producer of that product, like you can put out a little bit of what's inside, but at some point, how much are you starting to give away? And there's value in the product, so you have to charge for it and whatever else. And I don't want to get into the business end, but the bottom line there is that people open this thing up and they go, oh, I see a barbell back squat. I see a barbell deadlift. I see a barbell bench press or a dumbbell incline chest press, like a lat pull down with a cable, chest flies with cables. Those are all, if you're working out and you're feeling confident enough maybe to get into a pre-programmed type of program for you, and you're going to purchase this online, chances are you've been around the game at least a little bit and you kind of understand where you're coming from. In this day and age, obviously, that information is free and easy to find out there with regard to, well, what is a cable chest fly? I get it. If you've never been to a gym before, maybe you don't know, but I would be hard-pressed if I had 20 people standing here in front of me that were generally novice to intermediate, they would know what that is. So the point is you're presented with a solution to your problem, right? The solution being, here's the program you do to get this result. The reality of that is not always a reality. And I think where people are challenged, and I was just having this conversation with my buddy Tim down in Florida, and here's what he said. He's just like, hey man, I think talking about exercise variation is key. Because at some point you have to not do what's in the program and do what you can do consistently in terms of exercise. And he goes on to say, so for example, I learned that I can't do overhand pull-ups because it wrecks my biceps tendon. And the same with hammer curls. But he's not exactly sure. He hasn't maybe had an exact diagnosis on exactly what the problem might be. But what he wants to do is do something that gives him longevity, but still allows him to do his pulls and his arm curls and whatever else. So he goes on, this is really smart. He goes, so in other words, do what you can safely do and with intensity rather than the quote unquote best exercise for that body part. And I think that is a tough thing for a lot of people to wrap their head around. Like, what is the best exercise? I mean, we've done podcasts on what we think are the quote unquote best exercises for certain things. That is just a big generalization. It's goal dependent, human dependent, all those things. So I don't know, maybe we talk about some of the solutions to doing that, but more importantly, kind of start with like, how do you know when it's not the right thing? And then how do you choose the right thing to do? And then how does that experimentation process work for you? So, I mean, this guy, just provided a really specific one, and that he's like, I'm doing pull-ups. I'm going to do pull-ups. He goes on, we went on to talk about it, and just in terms of his thumb position on the bar makes a big difference. I mean, what are some indicators some more obvious indicators right off the bat that could, and less obvious, I guess, for that matter, that would let you know that this might not be the right exercise in this program for you, thereby leading to maybe it's not even the right program for you, but that's probably a different conversation. But what are some of the things that pop up?
First and foremost is pain.
Yeah,
right?
Pain.
Or when you're going through the movement pattern and it just doesn't feel right. You feel uneven, or you have a pinching sensation or a blocking sensation, like you feel blocked in a movement pattern.
Popping.
Yeah, the popping, but with that, I'm of the old camp that if it doesn't hurt and you don't have pain the next day or any other types of symptoms, then I would probably go ahead and continue to do it, as so long as you're not creating more damage, because we have popping in our body, regularly. Mm-hmm. So if you have some type of crepitus, is what it's called, popping, cracking, creaking, as long as you don't have pain, swelling, any kind of, discoloration the next day, any type of temperature change to the body area, you can still move, all of those types of things. I'd probably go ahead and continue doing it. Yeah,
so I think that's the thing. Like, people are like, am I hurting, or is this the way it's supposed to feel?
I can tell you, like, if I start squatting first thing, my knees are creaking and crunching and popping, but they don't hurt right then.
Do they go away?
It depends on the type of squatting that I'm doing. And right now I've been doing a lot of strength training for my knees, and it's not through squatting, but I'm now able to squat. But when I start warming up, it's creaking and all of that, and it doesn't hurt. But there have been times in the past where, that doesn't feel right. So guess what? I'm not going to do it.
Nice. Yeah, let's talk about that actually. So you're squatting, knees, you talked about crepitus. Man, I've heard, and your knees do this, but like, does anybody know, if maybe you're a person like this, where like they get down into a squat and it just sounds like sandpaper or gravel, like rubbing it on itself, like a bag full of gravel in their knees. And you're just going, oh my God, that sounds painful. But what you're saying is, it doesn't sound painful. Or it doesn't hurt, sorry.
If it doesn't hurt them, they don't have any symptoms as far as later that day or the next day or even 2 days, as far as joint effusion, swelling within the joint space. They don't have any, secondary pain around their knees, then that's probably their norm, especially if they're an older individual that's been physically active. That's just, par for the course. Our bodies start to degenerate over time. And if they're asymptomatic, they say it doesn't hurt, then I'd probably say, okay, then go ahead and continue, but be aware.
Right. So you're talking about like that awareness of it's not hurting, but you understand that means there's been a breakdown in your body. This is an important part to understand. Like okay, so you're hearing things that weren't there a couple of years ago. You may be seeing a few things that, weren't there a couple of years ago, like some atrophy in a certain area, or the fact that your kneecap looks like it might be in a little bit of a different place than it used to be a few years ago, which could have something to do with the atrophy, that kind of stuff. Just not, things have changed. But the other thing is that audible stuff that you hear. Like, it just sounds like a creaky door. It sounds like that gravel, rubbing or sandpaper running together. But it isn't hurting, at least not yet.
And so, being aware as far as your movement pattern, being aware of if this starts to bother you someday, then yeah, you need to address it. But in the meantime, what are some other things that you can be doing if you recognize this is something new, or maybe this isn't something new? This is something that's been going on for decades, right? So I think it's just all being aware of what's happening, what you're doing, how you're feeling at the time. And
well, let's talk about that one specifically with the squat, because I think that's an exercise that a lot of people are challenged with, and whether it's their knees or their hips or their back, ankle, shoulders, if they're doing like a barbell back squat, if they've got some issues there in terms of getting
full body exercise.
Yeah. So let's talk about what you're doing. Like, that didn't stop you from squatting. You just have made some adjustments to your squatting to make sure that you're maintaining the strength in and around that joint specifically. And we have talked a little bit about your medical history on the show specific to your knees, and they're not awesome, right? There's some meniscal tears, both sides, right?
Chondromalacia, so that's the roughening on the back of the patella. I think I probably have some femoral condyle articular degeneration as well, just because of some of the symptoms of when I walk and how my knee gives way, and I don't think it's necessarily meniscal. I mean, I do have meniscal tears, but some of the other things that are happening in there. So yeah, like, I mean, what's made a huge difference? I mean, there's a period of time, our house is 3 levels, 3 sets of stairs, so many freaking ass stairs. Is it 4?
It's more than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
it's 5 sets of stairs.
It used to hurt to go down the stairs, or I'd have to take one step at a time. But I've really started to address my knees and the musculature around my knees so that I have more strength and stability. And, you know, it got to the point where walking outside on pavement, I could maybe go 30 minutes, and then the next 2 days my knees were really swollen.
Yeah. I remember that vividly. Just some days were good days, and some days could be really bad days. But let's talk about some of the alternatives. So it didn't stop you from squatting.
Didn't stop me from squatting.
But what were some of the alternative exercises you did in order to alleviate that, but still challenge yourself to build strength within the knee, as well as build your squat strength? Can you walk through a couple of them?
I incorporated some TKEs back in. So that's terminal knee extensions. That's where you put a band around the back of your knee. I put it just below my knee crease, and then I tie it off in front of me, and then I create tension on the band. So I make it a quad dominant exercise where I allow my knee to go into flexion. My foot is flat on the ground, and then I think about pushing my knee back into the band and firing my quad. I also put my hands on top of my quadriceps when I'm doing this exercise. So when I'm going into knee flexion, I go slowly, and so I can feel my muscles elongating. And then again, when I push my knee back into the band, my hands are still on my thighs, so I can feel that muscle contraction. And then from that, I go into a quad dominant squat. But it took me a while to get into that. And I was doing small repetitions of these quad dominant squats with the bands still on and its body weight. And then I started to incorporate over time doing a goblet squat. And my goblet squat right now even is only 15 pounds, but I'm doing 15 TKEs, and I'm then doing 15 knee dominant squats. And I do this every day that I am doing lower body. So I'm doing it 3 days a week. Mm-hmm. I even take my band, not that I've used it yet, but I even take my band with me when we travel in case I want to be able to keep my work up for my knees, just maintenance work. And then that's before I do any kind of other strength training, and I'll still do my squats. And then when I started to incorporate squats back in, whether it was back squats or front squats, I had a hard time with actually, believe it or not, front squats for a period of time. And so I actually moved away from the barbell and I did goblet squats.
There you go.
Actually, I think it was more body weight squats, and then I would do isometric holds in various degrees of hip and knee flexion.
Which are challenging, right? Yeah.
And then from the isometric holds, then I would go into goblet squats, and then eventually I went into squats with a barbell. And I went with, I changed my stance up. I used to be a little bit wider than shoulder, and then I moved it in. So I was a little bit more narrow. I was really paying attention to what was happening at my feet, where my shin was aligning with my toes, where my shin was aligning with my knees. And so I incorporated tempos into my squats, tempos and pauses. And when you do that, you can't go very heavy. But I can tell you now, I'm still doing a little bit of tempo work in my hypertrophy stage, but my loads are way more than what I was doing with a goblet squat. Now I'm back to a barbell, and I've also gone back to front squats, and I'm not having any pain in my knees.
There you go.
But this has been a journey. I mean, it's not overnight. It hasn't been 2 months. It hasn't been 6 months. This is probably something that I've been working on over the last year and a half.
So were there other exercises that we were choosing to try and overload in a different way, the hip and knee complex, like you would in a squat, so to speak? What was the exercise, if any, that you could do outside of the quote unquote squat that the program called for? I did a lot of, so this isn't directly answering your question. I didn't do any knee extension as far as double leg knee extension work, as what do you call it, quad extension, where you're seated. Yeah, knee extension,
I didn't do
which you'll
any
find
of
in
that
a lot of mainstream gyms. Yeah.
Because that was too much pressure on my patella. I stayed away from lunges just because sometimes that unilateral work was too much. So I didn't do Bulgarian split squats. What I really did was I really focused on the isometric holds of squatting, and I really focused on doing goblet squats and those types of things with really good form. And I did not have to use a ton of load to feel it.
Yeah, one of the ones that you left out that I've seen you do is the Spanish squat.
She just didn't. She just didn't
I
call
didn't call it the Spanish squat.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't call
Love
it
a
the
good old
Spanish
Spanish
squat.
squat.
Yeah.
You want to go through that?
So that's where I would tie a band around the back of my knee, and I would tie it off in front of me.
Like the TKE,
like the TKE,
but on both knees.
But on both knees, correct. And then so what I would do is I would have a little bit narrower stance, so probably hip width for me. I would keep my feet flat on the ground, and it was a quad dominant squat. So I was bending at my ankles, at my knees, and at my hips, but allowing my knees to travel forward over my toes. And then when I would stand up, I know, right? When I would stand up, I was really focusing on more of pushing my knees back into the band versus standing up and pushing my knees into the band secondarily. The focus was pushing my knees into the band as I was standing up, and then making sure that I was really squeezing my quads. And I would do this with time under load. It wasn't a fast kind of a muscle contraction. It wasn't moving through the process. It was being very aware and doing this exercise with intent. And over time, as I progressed that, I would actually, believe it or not, allow my heels to come up slightly off the ground. But this is, again, advanced.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. So that was a lot. Like a lot of people listen to this going, dude, that was a lot. Like I just need to squat. Okay, well, if your program's calling for that barbell back squat or whatever, you just heard CeCe talk about the goblet squat, but use a leg press. Try the leg press and try different variations there for your legs. This is a place you can go really overload, the lower extremity and still, stimulate the things. It's not the same as a barbell squat, but it gives you that stimulus, like that central nervous system stimulus if you're really trying to push those heavy loads. There are hack squat, pendulum squats, there's belt squats. I mean, the gyms have really stepped these up. You used to basically have your leg sled, right, and your hack squat, which those are the ones that, like, in the good old days, there wasn't a lot of adjustment there, and it was just like trying to rip it felt like my kneecaps wanted to pop right off the end of the end of my knees there. But they have you mentioned the knee extension. I'm not a huge fan of that one. I mean, if you're looking for extension. If you're looking for some quad development, like it's not a bad machine, but again, most big for your buck. And we're just talking about like, hey, choose something that you can do to achieve the same intensity, volume, and result that you're looking to. But it might mean stepping away, like you said, and going, well, if this exercise isn't working for me and I don't have a lot available to me right now and I want to back off, and we could call that corrective exercise, but I wouldn't. I would call that just a smarter approach to strength training my quads, those muscles which support that knee joint. So, so that's a really good example. But you create intensity through all the different variables, and I think people are just like, look, the only way I'm going to get that growth, that hypertrophy, that strength is by doing that big, heavy movement all the time. That's kind of stinking thinking. But it's also, the next part of this is like, oh, my knees are feeling better. Right? So,
and I'm back to the barbell. I'm front squatting and I'm back squatting.
So like that entry into that though is important to talk about re-entry into that, because it was bothering you there for a while. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So you took a very deliberate approach. Let me say this. You took a very deliberate approach to, okay, this is becoming a problem. And it is a problem. If I let it continue to go, it's going to be more of a problem. I need to actively respond to this versus, oh, this doesn't feel good, I'm just not going to do this exercise.
Big difference.
There's a huge difference there. And the return to play was very structured. To play in that particular exercise again, it wasn't like, I'm going to take some time off because this seems to be bothering me, and then go back to it 2 months later when you're not hurting as much anymore and just retest to see if it's still a problem for you. That's like, I wonder if the electricity is still running through that electric socket that I put my finger in 2 months ago, and is it going to feel the same or different? And maybe it doesn't feel the same initially. I don't know, but to think that that's going to fix the problem is a whole other thing. anyway, I think that's a really good example. And so for people that have been in the programs for a long time or been lifting for a long time, a lot of times, like I said, my buddy Tim here, he knows. Like, I've been doing this long enough. Like, I know the things that I shouldn't be doing. It doesn't mean I don't do other things, but I just know I shouldn't be doing that. There are camps out there, like from the coaching perspective, that would say, well, then, dude, you need to do the corrective exercise. And that's because we've had these conversations, your tissue quality needs to change, and you need to put the time into your mobility and your flexibility and your soft tissue work and all this kind of stuff. And while that might be very true, none of that shit guarantees that it's ever going to be better.
Go away.
It might get a little bit better. You might be able to really rectify that situation, but is the investment of time and effort worth worth maybe not having it back in the long run? The other part of it is like there are some things that just aren't going to get corrected. We've talked about some of those things before, but if you've got accumulation of trauma, injuries, things like that accumulate over time, thinking that backing off to do some corrective exercise. No corrective fucking exercise is going to fix an orthopedic issue. It isn't. It can support you in your approach to doing that. But fucking all these trainers out there that all they're talking about is corrective exercise, and I'm going to fix your hip or fix your back or fix your knee. It is one component of a lot of components. So don't try and corrective exercise your way out of an orthopedic issue. If you've got a problem and you know about it, and the next part to know is like, what exactly is it? Because the more I understand about it, then I can know, well, when I do apply this quote unquote corrective exercise, am I potentially helping it or potentially exacerbating it? Yeah, what's the reality of that?
Like what you're talking about is, let's say the guy with the pulling up and it hurts his biceps tendon, right? So we can go through, we can stretch his biceps tendon, we can work on all the fascia on the front side of the anterior portion of the arm, right? Now, did we work on his shoulder blades? Did we work on anything? No, we just kind of hit the area that's hurting. But the reason why he's probably having biceps tendonitis in a pull-up is because when he gets to the top, he lets his shoulders ride, elevate, and protract.
Maybe.
Which jams the humeral head into the biceps tendon. So when you start looking at these, like, did I deal with this and I changed tissue quality here? Yeah, we might have changed tissue quality in the biceps and the biceps tendon, but we did not strengthen
the mechanics.
The retractors of the scapulae, nothing. And we didn't work on the mechanics.
Maybe not, yeah.
So all these baby steps are these things that I see are a lot that, like, I hit corrective exercise and I'm right back into the barbell squat where it's like CeCe, corrective exercise, training smarter now through the same motor pattern, locking in a different motor pattern because the one she was using before wasn't working for her. And after that, now she's able to get into front squats, back squats, and be able to come back to that exercise instead of just kicking it away or trying to deal with some other selection of that exercise.
Yeah, I think there's a couple components to that. I mean, you nailed it there. There's a lot more than just what, again, corrective exercise. Corrective exercise is a very broad term, right? We were talking about correcting shoulder mechanics, but maybe you're at a point in your program where that there's not time for that. This is, or you're involved in some type of activity, sport, profession where I can't do that, or I've already lost so much in terms of mechanical advantage or biomechanics that it doesn't make sense for me to even do this anymore. So finding the workaround makes more sense. Again, there's a risk benefit there. We were talking before. CeCe and I were out in Virginia Beach, and we met with we were hanging out with Sheldon Stevens from 13 Bar Performance. He's the guy that works with the Rangers and the Delta guys out there at Fort Bragg. And he was talking about those elite guys that are in the unit there, and that he doesn't do a lot of overhead movement with them, weighted overhead movement with them, because most of them lack that mobility and that range of motion to load that safely and effectively to yield some type of result. So he finds workarounds for them, right? Because it just, like, what am I going to do? I get these guys train 8 hours a day, right? We get them in the gym for maybe an hour of those 8 hours, a few days a week. They're going to be doing things on their own that may or may not be that healthy for them, right? From a workout perspective, because they all want to do the WODs and, whatever else, despite his coaching. The point of this is that's sort of a joke, kind of an inside joke, because we were talking about that in that particular podcast. But my point of this is is he has to be kind of is like, what's the return on investment that I'm going to get from this? Like, I could sit here and try and get these guys, more of this shoulder mobility, improved shoulder mechanics or whatnot in this program. But there's the return on that investment is probably going to be much lower than is worth it. So same for the individual that's in their own program. They kind of have to make this decision for themselves. Like, what am I trying to achieve over time? Because if I'm just trying to maintain my strength or build some strength and stay healthy doing it, but I also understand my limitations and what may or may not be the right exercise for me to do when I see it pop up in a program that I might be purchasing or that my coach might be giving me, my quote unquote coach, online coach, whatever might be giving me, that still provides them the same benefit, right? As long as they can work themselves around it and out of it, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, choosing exercises or combinations of exercises there's way more than one way to skin a cat here. So just because you see it on your program doesn't necessarily mean you should or you have to be doing it. It doesn't necessarily mean you should be doing it. So again, like he was talking about, like, I just, if I don't wrap my thumb, or excuse me, if I don't use my thumb as an opposable digit, right, on the pull-up bar, and I wrap it around the top, more of a monkey grip, then I don't create that torque through my elbow up into my shoulder, and my biceps tend to do a lot better, my quote-unquote shoulder, but it's just the biceps tendon that's running through that shoulder, tend to do a lot better. So I've just decided to do that. And I don't do hammer curls anymore. Good. There's a lot of fucking other arm exercises you can do to build your biceps. And there's more than one way to pull, and pulling with the monkey grip and doing a pull up and doing that pain-free. It's better than not doing that pull up at all if it's in your program and if it's part of your goal. So that's another example of how to kind of work through it. It's just sometimes it's just like, well, if I make this slight adjustment, you mentioned stance in the squat. Like, there's so many, you get online, you look at like how to do a squat, pull up a YouTube video, and
that's so individual, I think.
I mean, knees over toes, all this stuff. You'll find any number of videos where guys will talk for 15 minutes about where your feet have to be. This is the normal place for them to be or whatever. But obviously that is different per individual.
Yes. And that's what I meant as far as, when you're talking about squat stance and everything, yes, you do see a variety of individuals talking about, oh, this is how your squat stance should be. But at the end of the day, it should be very individual.
Yeah. So when you're looking at your program, like, how do you know what are some of the indicators? One is that pain, right? The other thing is like, are you the restriction that you feel, whether it's pain or not, that's giving you that funny feeling like something doesn't feel right here. So if there's this level of discomfort, I think another indicator is that there's no flexibility programmed in at all. Like, if you're on a program and there isn't like, no, it has to be like this, then that might be the wrong program for you. And my point would be like, okay, so if our goal is to do a max 1 rep squat, deadlift, bench press at the end of this time frame, this period of time, well, getting around those movements is not an option for you if you're injured or whatever the case is. That's not the right program for you. And you need, as a user, to recognize that, like, not the right program for me, not necessarily the right exercises. Like, you chose the wrong program, right? Jeff, I don't know if it was after we started or before we were sort of talking about like bodybuilders, like they've learned this over time. Like, my goal is to get as big as I can, look aesthetically, as proportionate as I can, to get on stage and, win the show or whatever it is. And they figured out over time that there are certain exercises they do, there's certain exercises they don't do, knowing that one that they used to do a long time ago yielded a really good or particular result. They've now don't do that anymore. You want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, a lot of these bodybuilders do. They're just pushing, right? They're going to work hard regardless. And you have a lot of the smart guys over time. They start looking at the anatomy for themselves. How long is their humeral bone? How long is their forearms? All of these different things that are going to play into different levers and different exercises. Start getting into shoulder injuries and hip injuries, whatever it is. And they'll be like, how can I regress whatever's going on in the compensation so I can get max intracellular muscular fiber or tension, so that they are maximizing the force within that muscle cell for their anatomy, right? And I feel like just if we could take that out of bodybuilding
And put it in everything else. Yeah.
Because, that's what everyone's trying to do with corrective exercise. And I totally agree with you. One, I am a huge proponent of corrective exercise.
Same.
And I have a lot of people do it. But
Same.
at the same time,
you need to understand what that is.
and you're supposed to get a fuck away from it. You're not supposed to do it for the rest of your life. You're supposed to correct what the fuck is wrong and then move on.
A good point.
That's just not what I'm seeing in my side.
That turns into the exercise program.
It's the rest of their life.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with working on whatever limitation you have for the rest of your life, but you have to find a way to come back and squat. And whether that is the Spanish squat, whether that is the box squat, goblet squat, whatever feels good for you. So then we can start stimulating that muscle group, training that muscle pattern, because it's a daily muscle pattern, right? It's a daily movement pattern. And being able to come back and just be able to do that with body weight. I don't think that's a hard task to ask.
No, it isn't. You made a really good point there. Just coming over to the top on the corrective exercise is something that you should be doing temporarily in order to work your way through a problem, not make it what you do forever. Now, again, some of these quote unquote corrective exercises, they're just movement patterns, right? Yep. So what makes it corrective versus making it something else? Application, right? And that application should change over time. I think I have a theory on how some of this kind of came to be, and I've mentioned this with the jiu-jitsu thing specific to me, and I wished I'd started that younger in life because of the beating that you have to take and all the figuring out that you need to do in order to become good at it early on, right? Like there's just you got to get out there and get your ass kicked. And when you're young, you're more pliable, even just dumber. Like you don't really realize what's going on, right? You're not as aware. That's a really great time to start jiu-jitsu because you're just taking that beating, and your body's a little bit more resilient. Maybe recovers more. You're not bringing baggage, injuries, things to the table, even your brain to the table. In a lot of cases, you're just going, which can be a huge advantage. And then obviously, as you get older, now you can manage that stuff a little bit more. Like you understand. Plus, you understand how to stay out of certain situations, so you're not putting yourself in this potential risky situation or whatnot. I didn't do that, so it was very hard for me, later. But going back to these corrective exercise guys, and that's all they want to talk about all the time. And we may be guilty of that on the show, just making a huge emphasis on it. But this is the point. The point is it's not forever. We're trying to attack this very specific problem so we can move past the problem and find a longer term solution. But my theory on this is in the last probably 10 or 15 years, particularly in this space, like that whole corrective exercise thing got very, very popular. And there are a lot of, I'm just going to say, book smart people that maybe got through their education in the institutions of wherever they went through. Maybe they were doing some type of activity, sport or whatnot that didn't require or didn't emphasize strength and conditioning as we know strength and conditioning to be for other types of sports. Let's call it football, hockey.
They were playing badminton?
Yeah. I'm just going to say they were playing a lot of non-contact sports, right? And the other part of it is a lot of that stuff was cut out of schools. Strength training was cut out of schools. They didn't have the resources. And then the guys that they were putting in there were the guys that would take peanuts to do the job, right? And these were often college students that didn't have a lot of experience yet. They were just fresh newbies, and they hadn't had that time under their belt to understand all the nuance that goes into this. And so the corrective thing sounds really smart, and it is, because I think where that should be applied more is for the younger, newer person, right? Like these are the basic movement patterns and mechanics that you need to get really good at before we start adding in, max barbell back squats and deadlifts and things like that. So I think there was a shift there. Well, along the way, what ended up happening is those people never learned how to lift weights. They never learned how to lift weights, heavy weights, and they never learned or experienced pushing to that failure, whatever that is, that 1 rep max, because that was discouraged. Oh, we don't need to do 1 rep maxes in order to, in order to learn, in order to test people's strength. Well, the older crowd, let's just say the previous crowd before all this stuff started coming around, that was just trying to bridge the gap, like, oh, this is kind of smart, we should be talking about this more, had done all that, right? And again, they probably damaged themselves in quite a few ways, but they also learned a few things along the way in doing that. So sometimes the meathead approach works, right? But it makes sense to be smart about that meathead approach when it stops working, because eventually it's going to stop working. Yep. So I think, for a lot of guys, and again, I'm just going to go back to my friend Tim here, like he gets that shit. He's like, nah, I lift heavy, I go hard, right? But I also recognize what too hard is for me. And I also understand that I can still go really hard and just not do that particular thing. And it allows me to continue to go really hard. So, when we started this, it was just like, hey, how do you recognize where those things are? It comes with things where you may be in a program. What are indicators that they're telling you, maybe you shouldn't be doing something? How do you know when to maybe find a different exercise? If you haven't had a lot of experience with different exercises, this could be very overwhelming. And again, I think that goes back to kind of part and parcel of what I was saying before about people that just kind of learn from books or they learn from Instagram or YouTube. There's a lot of missing pieces there. You're just seeing it, you're not really experiencing it. And then there's nobody there to really correct or really push or whatever while you're doing it after watching it. People are kind of learning it on their own. I think that's fantastic. But again, I think there's a lot of missing pieces. So when you get it, they're choosing programs based on kind of deduction. Like this kind of makes sense for me without a lot of back end experience. So here's the shameless plug. When you're looking for a program, first off, I said this before, you should be looking for one that does provide some level of flexibility and talks about the fact that you are an individual and that there is no one size fits all. And so we're doing while this guy, this company, this trainer, this bodybuilder, whatever may have done his very best to put this program together for you, unless he designed it specifically for you based on a lot of information that he gathered from you, and he's constantly there to make changes for you, then that's a generalized program. And that there should be flexibility in that, even if it was, by the way, very specifically designed for you. There should be some flexibility in that program. So that's a red flag if you find one that's like, no, you have to do this. Again, I talked about the caveat to that is like if you're squat, bench, and deadlift person and you're trying to do a max, is that the right program for you? Just understand you're going to be going through a lot of things and the workarounds become more limited when you get to a certain point there.
Because I like what you're saying, like with the workarounds, right? When you're talking about like squat, bench, and dead, right? When we're talking like even looking at power lifters coming into meets, like some will stop back squatting when they're about to, like, I'm trying to push heavy bench, right? Because it tears my shoulders up. So there's just little things that some people will pull away from, and just depending on what they're trying to lift in or what lift exacerbates their shoulders to where they feel like I do shitty in bench now because I do heavy back squats leading up into prep day.
Yep.
Just stuff like that as well, and learning how to program around depending on what lift it is, right?
Yeah, so it's just finding what works. So when you're testing out programs, it's the way we look at our programming here. If you're looking at Red Dot Strong, or you're looking at RDF Max, or you're looking at our membership program, there's variations for everything. And there's also a buildup into it. And we also tell people, look, if you're kind of past this buildup phase and you want to jump right in to some of the more working or capacity building, hypertrophy building phases first, then go right ahead. Just understand if you don't have good, what's the word I'm looking for? If foundations or foundational movement patterns, or if you don't have these compulsory skills, which is what you should be working when you go to the gym every day, regardless of whether you're going that's a skill. One rep max is as much skill as it is power and strength.
For sure.
It's skill, and you should be practicing that every time. So if you've been practicing that really well and you want to jump into something that's a little bit, later into the program, you can, right? But you could also always go back if you need to. So I guess when people are choosing programs, choosing exercises, just make sure you have like an escape route of some kind, and I would call out just flexibility, and start looking around at what are the things that you can do. Like we see wraps, wrist wraps. We see, like, I wear an elbow sleeve. Like I've got medial elbow issues. We've figured it out, and here's my personal story on that. So I had this medial elbow pain showed up a couple of years ago riding my bike more, particularly my mountain bike. And I was like, damn, I 5 minutes into a bike ride, I was like, damn, that is really bothering me. It's going into extension on those handlebars or whatever at my wrist, and that elbow would fire up. And it was painful during the ride, but more painful like when I would grip a bar or a dumbbell or anything, like even like the Pelican case or whatever, my duffel bag to carry or my backpack. So I was like, I got to figure this out. What is this? So we started a little soft tissue work around the elbow. Didn't change anything, right? Then I got up into, then I started to see one of the practitioners that comes through here on occasion. I was like, hey man, he does some somatherapy, but he also is a chiropractor. He does some other stuff. He goes, I think this is actually coming more from the shoulder and it's coming down through your tricep. And so we figured it out. And here's what I figured out. I figured out there was no way I was going to do all that fucking work and stay away from the bike riding, because that wasn't an option for me, right? And stay away from the working out. So I needed to find a workaround. So I kind of like did a little bit of the treatment / corrective exercise on it. And I found an elbow sleeve with a brace that helps me with my situation. I've been wearing that thing and I haven't had any elbow pain since.
Nice.
So it allows me to pull up, to lift heavy, to grab that barbell, to ride my bike without the elbow sleeve. I can ride my bike without the elbow sleeve now. So just having that little bit, support, it gets me through, and I'm fine with it. So sometimes, like even today, actually, I rode this morning. I've got a little bit of pain in there now, but it's nowhere near what it was before. So going back, it's like finding out the dosage, the type and the dosage that you can kind of handle or work around, and knowing when enough is enough. So go get yourself on a program that makes sense there. Reach out if you have questions about like, hey, what are some alternative exercises? And don't be afraid to maybe back out of things that may seem a little unorthodox, or just because you say I'm not doing back squats right now and you go to a leg press doesn't mean it's any less.
Yep.
You might get some really great results out of that leg press as an example, or go, from your barbell bench press and you start doing maybe a little bit more dumbbell chest press, single arm dumbbell chest press. So you're not fixed to that bar, or cable chest fly, or
if you're doing an incline bench, lower the incline a little bit. Yeah, right. For some if you're having some shoulder discomfort, try different grips. Try a thumbless grip. So again, going back to your monkey grip, when you're doing any kind of pulling, whether it's a pull down or a pull up or a dumbbell row. The other things, limit your range of motion with your pulling. Don't drive your elbow past your torso. You can still get a really good back and bicep work with your rowing when you're limiting your pull to about your torso. Take different grips as far as maybe a palm up grip when you're doing a row or a pull down or a neutral grip where your thumb's facing the ceiling instead of a pronated grip when your palm's facing down. I mean, all of that's going to change the dynamic of the pull in and of itself, because a lot of the times, your biceps are attached to your radius, and your radius, which is a bone in your forearm, you have two, your radius and your ulna, you're going to get a crossover of the radius when you're in a pronated position. So, I mean, your anatomy, your bony anatomy is going to be in a different position if you change your grip up.
Yeah, so experiment.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we're saying. And then find the things that work for you, and don't get emotionally attached to doing the exercise that's in the program that you think you're supposed to be doing. Because if it's hurting you, if it's debilitating you, or if it's keeping you from doing the other things that are important within that program and beyond, it's the wrong exercise for you, at least for right now. Find something else. And then when you return back to that, just if you're going to try to return back to that, be smart. Don't go over there and just go, oh, well, I feel better now, so I'm going to go back and really
load it up and
load it up. Because what you'll oftentimes do is just set yourself back to exactly where you started with this whole thing from the beginning.